I'm Frank Vaughn. It's July 23rd, 2025, and life is often a gauntlet. We don't all make it to the average life expectancy. Many fall by the wayside, but I'll tell you, I've noticed a trend over the last couple years. When I go looking for people I used to know, or I go looking for high school friends, or I go looking for people that I did some cool things with, more often than not, they're already gone. In their late 30s, their mid 40s, they're gone. And the ones that I can find have something in common, and the ones that I can't find because they're gone also have something in common. Some of the healthiest people I've ever known in my life. The one that I found out about on Sunday really hit me hard. And sometimes, it's almost like you're so resilient and you steel yourself for the realities that have been unleashed upon us over the last few years. You steel yourself, but then every now and again, someone that's now gone finds that chink in your armor and just throws you right off course. In a related note, we have the Freedom Convoy organizers Tamara Litch and Chris Babber facing sentencing. The Crown wants 7 years to put these people in prison. And what they do, they convicted of counseling others to disobey a court order. So they said words. Now I know they said words that advised the conduct that would break a law, break a lawful court order, but there are people who stab other people, shoot other people, sell death on our streets, and they can't stay in jail to save their lives, literally. They can't stay in jail to save their lives. They can't stay in jail to get clean. We can't put them in a halfway house because it would endanger their human rights. These people and all the people who attended were targeted by the government in a now illegal use, improper use, whatever you want to call it. I call it illegal, of the Emergencies Act. It was discovered by Parliament that it was used wrongly, that an injustice was committed, and government power, the power of automatic weapons, the power of overwhelming force, legal use of force, which the other side is denied, and they didn't use force, the other side. They used peaceful protest. Now you might say people were disturbed in Ottawa by horn honking. If you live in a nation's capital, that's where people go when they're being repressed, when they're being unfairly targeted. Protest, noisy protest sometimes, is necessary when an entire set of the population is being actively discriminated against, forced out of their jobs, and faced with a choice between participating in a wide-scale medical experiment and being able to feed their families. You may say they had a choice, but some caved to the coercion, and their voices were not heeded. We had a prime minister asking if their very existence should be tolerated, and none of them in that government ever faced any kind of semblance of justice, if you can call it justice, like what is being served to these individuals that are tied up in this. And it's not just Chris Babber and Tamara Litch, it's many others. And it's funny how the Conservative MPs supported the Freedom Convoy, or at least supported them. It was support. Aaron O'Toole led the Conservative Party into disaster. And before he was even out of the leadership role, thank God he was gone, there were people like Leslyn Lewis and Pierre Poilievre that were going to the Freedom Convoy and getting their pictures taken, handing out coffee and donuts. But since then, they haven't really raised their voices during the election. Where were they? Why weren't they talking about this? Why hasn't there been a greater push for accountability? Literal accountability, legal accountability for the people who perpetrated the crime of illegally using the Emergencies Act on these protesters who were literally just trying to defend their human rights. The CPC has come late to the party. Now this article, Litch said on X, there is a fine line between politics and the judiciary, as there should be. And I have long understood the uncomfortable position elected officials find themselves in when it comes to commenting on cases that are before the court. In our case, the double standard and the vindictive nature from the prosecution office has become too obvious to ignore and will set a precedent going forward that will affect all Canadians who choose to peacefully protest or deter them from exercising their charter rights. to peacefully assemble. There is no fine line between politics and the judiciary. The judiciary is a branch of politics in Canada. There is no direct linkage between the people and justice. I don't know why the Conservative Party would pussyfoot around this. The entire country is dominated by liberal appointees who have been appointed for their ideology, for their stance on leftist extremism. It's not just the Senate, it is the judiciary, and the people can't touch it. It doesn't get more political than that. So I understand when you're facing sentencing, you say words like this, but there's no excuse anymore. The Liberals have stacked everything in this country to their benefit. They own the media through usage of your tax dollars, which are extracted out of your pocket at the barrel of a gun. They then turn around and give it to their media allies. They have stacked the Senate in a way that completely dishonors what the institution was supposed to be about. It was supposed to be a chamber of sober second thought with independent minds. Previous prime ministers had refused to do what Trudeau did out of honor and respect. That's long gone. The judiciary, all the judges, are handpicked for their ideology, not for their fairness and being able to cut things down the middle. No. This idea that the CPC should stay out of it, that they should continue to behave honorably if you believe that story, is completely outmoded. It's time to get active. It's time to get involved. And the CPC is involved, but in many respects, not in the way that we would like. When it comes to foreign policy, there is no difference between the Liberals and the Conservative Party of Canada. None whatsoever, and it sucks. And I've covered how it sucked even during the election. So when it comes to this trade nonsense, the Conservative Party is identical to Mark Carney and are more than happy to enable him through voting for something like Bill C-5, which consolidates power into Carney's hands. Now, they're hoping, I'm sure, under Poilievre, that they'll win an election one day, and that power will fall to them. And the premiers seem to be all lining up to give that power away to Ottawa, to sacrifice even more of their autonomy while they make wind. And they make, there are countervailing forces unleashed from the premier's offices of Scott Moe and Daniel Smith. On the one hand, they do things that take their power back, but on the other hand, they give power away. A read on the situation is really hard to achieve because they are trying to sit on a fence when they need to take a side. Carney tells premiers he's only going to accept the best deal for Canada. You might as well swap Poilievre's name in there too in U.S. trade talks, because it wouldn't be any different if Poilievre was prime minister. This farce would still be ongoing. This is CBC. This is captured state media. One of the headlines is Scott Moe arrives at Premier Summit, warning some U.S. tariffs are Canada's reality. Nowhere on this screen do they talk about the tariffs that we charge the world. Now, I've got a literal example right here. This is, let me just make sure I'm actually on camera. This is a hunk of Parmigiano Reggiano. It can only come from a specific region of Italy. You can make this cheese anywhere in the world, or imitation of it. But in order to be Parmigiano Reggiano, you have to come from Italy. This block of cheese, we got a screaming deal on it, is subject to a 245% tariff. It's true. Now, admittedly, under the EU trade deal, something like 2,500 metric tons of EU cheese can come into Canada without facing that tariff, but there's hard cap limits. And why are there hard cap limits? Because Canada loves its cartels. So we have this thing in dairy called supply management. And supply management, which, by the way, supply management was brought in to protect the small family dairy farm. That's how it was sold to Canadians. But since it was implemented, there was roughly speaking, 100,000, I think it was more like 120,000, but we'll cut it to 100,000 so it's less extreme sounding, dairy farms in Canada. There's 11,000 today. So in terms of protecting dairy farms, it's been a failure because 80 to 90% of the dairy farms have closed up and disappeared. Of those that are left, think about this. The combined operating budget of the various lobby groups that lobby on behalf of dairy farmers, which include all of this in our trade deals, willing to sacrifice other segments of our economy in order to protect dairy, have a combined total of $120 million roughly in budget to lobby and buy ads and carry on. So if you do the math, at 1,100 dairy farms, each farm has a surplus of about $10,000, $11,000 that they can then use to donate or to be, actually, I don't even think it's a donation. I think it's probably a requirement. I don't actually know the answer to that. I do know that $120 million budget that the dairy lobby groups enjoy has to come from somewhere, and it probably comes out of the pocket of dairy farmers. $11,000 a year, that's not on food, that's not on expenses. That's just for lobbying. Some of the best, wealthiest farms in Canada are the 10% of dairy farms that are left since the disaster of supply management came in. It's a cartel protecting itself, and it doesn't seem to care what sectors of the Canadian economy it sacrifices. And our politicians, now think about this. The dairy lobby has $120 million in budget to conduct itself. The budget of the Liberal Party, the budget of the Conservative Party is a fraction of that. And some of that money comes from the dairy lobby. In addition to, we're not talking about the 11,000 that's put right into their organizations. We're talking about individual farms cutting checks for whatever it is, $17.50, the maximum political contribution. Each of those 11,000 farms, many of those 11,000 farms find themselves in a position where they can afford to cut that check. And so your politicians chase it unequivocally. And it doesn't matter how broke Canada is, they continue to do that. Now, phasing out supply management has worked wonders. It worked in Ontario, one of the world's greatest wine export markets now, Ontario. New Zealand phased out supply management. They export cheese to the world now. But that's not how Canada works. And you can bet, once again, that will dictate the losers more than the winners when it comes to trade negotiations. But what else is new? CBC not telling us the full truth about the guts. I mean, where's the in-depth investigation? We covered a couple videos ago how they did this in-depth docking investigation about white nationalism in Canada, but they don't have even a semblance of that budget to investigate the issues underlying trade, to tell us about how expensive it is to do business with Canada and how punitive our tariffs are on the rest of the world. We have a crisis of honesty. Canada and Canadians in general have this really high view of ourselves. We think we're sitting on top of the world. We're the best country in the world. We go around the world. We put on display Canadian flags on our bags because we expect special treatment because we're so great. And we're better than Americans. You know what? Actually, let's just do this right now. The other night, I was in a space. This was Sunday night, and I'm kind of glad. I couldn't stay in it to save my life. I kept getting kicked out. I kept getting demoted as a speaker, and I don't think it was the person running it. I think something was going on with Twitter. It was brutal. But I'm kind of glad it happened because that was the night I found out about my friend. I went and bought myself, and there's another one. Sorry for the cut, but it's incredible. I can't even finish one thought without coming up with something else about Canada that's just insane to me that nobody knows about because you're not educated. The media that you fund doesn't tell you the full truth. They don't paint a picture. They just paint a political ideology in front of your face, and that's all they ever give you. I found out about my friend, and so I went and I bought myself a 6-pack of Modelo. I'd never had Modelo before. I've been wanting to try it my entire life. So I went and I bought a 6-pack, which I paid $18 for. I think it was actually more than that. It's over $3 a beer for Modelo. I believe it's a Mexican brand. It's quite good, actually. But that beer is subject to excise taxes. It's subject to GST. It's subject to arbitrary markup. $3 a beer. At any rate, I drank all 6 of them before I got involved in that space. So I think Twitter was doing me a favor by keeping me out of it. But I wanted to talk about how Canada has an identity crisis and has had an identity crisis from the very beginning. We talk a good game about nationalism through our protectionism. So protecting dairy and doing supply management in different sectors of the economy while at the same time completely ignoring and leaving to flounder the rest of the economy, which just gets taxed and held hostage for political purposes. So we pretend to do nationalist protectionist stuff, but we don't do it all the way. We only do it where it's convenient. The rest of the time, we're busy selling out the nation. So culturally, we're in the midst of a tailspin of cultural death in Canada because we're told we don't have a core identity, that we don't have a core national identity, that we don't have a core cultural identity. We're an officially multicultural country, and all we do is celebrate the culture of everything else, and we viscerally oppose Canada having any individual identity. This goes back to our origin story. See, the Americans died by the tens of thousands fighting a war of independence against the British, and they won for themselves the ability to write their own story and create their own state and build their own empire eventually. When Canadians, before we were Canadians, were presented with the choice, the people who lived on this land, we chose servitude. We chose the crown. We chose the status quo. So as a colony growing up under the British wing, we chose to be a child, to be an extension of the crown. Now, there was an opportunity to do something different. There was the war between the French and the British, because it wasn't the war between the French and Canada, it was the war between the French and the British. And the British won right here in Canada. But from that point forward, it's this marriage that lacks a foundation. The Crown doesn't even really care about Canada anymore, except as a means, just like the rest of the world, to extract our resource wealth for their own benefit. Canada's a colony. It's not meant to have a strong national identity. That's why it's viscerally opposed everywhere. That's why it's so ideologically captured. That's why the only thing Canada's really known for is taxation. It's known for being a hard place to live. Even people coming here from India complain about the fact that it's impossible to live here, and many of them end up going back. We have a whole class of indentured servitude servants in the temporary foreign worker program. People hate it, and they should, because it displaces the ability of Canadians, Canadian-born people of all backgrounds, to be able to get work and jobs, because you're competing against foreigners who are being ruled over by the business owners, just like feudal lords ruled over serfs. They work them long hours, they underpay them, they threaten them with deportation if they dare speak up for their rights, for their legal rights. They live often 5-6 to a room, if not more. They're stuck in hotels, they work for nothing, they barely make anything. Many are forced to pay under the table cuts back to their managers. Your whole world of Tim Hortons and McDonald's and Wendy's is built on this institutional slavery for all of these people who want to talk about institutionalized racism. The TFW program is just that, taking maximum advantage of people. We have help wanted ads, not published in Canada anymore. They're published in India. And these poor suckers get involved and get sucked over here. Canada cannot sustain them. Canada doesn't want them. They're only here to be taken advantage of. But to get back to the point, Canada has an inferiority complex because we've never really been allowed to develop our own strong national identity. The Americans know who they are. The European elite, whether you like them or not, know where they're trying to go. The Russian people, the Chinese people, the Saudis, they all know who they are. The Israelis, they know who they are. They assert themselves. They represent their interests, not global interest. Canada's like that loud kid who the second they get punched turns into a crying mess on the ground, begging for their life. They're like the masked Antifa protester who's all loud and tough and in people's face and throws punches behind their back, but when actually faced with confrontation, collapse like a dying star. And that's represented in our national fabric. That's why our army is so weak. That's why we're so dependent. America leads, and we follow. Europe leads, and we follow. China leads, and we follow. And we try to follow them all at the same time. We try to people please. We try to tell them all that we're their best friend. We're recently changing our story about the United States, which is the most foolish thing, by the way. If we're going to be the thrall of any nation, it should be the Americans, because our greatest asset, since we've outsourced and deregulated and sold off most of our other great assets, our remaining great asset is our proximity to the largest market in the entire world, which we are thoroughly integrated with. 10 years of Carney's idea of further integration with Europe. We've been doing it already. You see, they've taken something they were doing already and they politicized it through their media, and they've amplified it. They've made it one of their defining messages, except it's been an ongoing process for 10 years. The distance between our oceans is the reason why it doesn't work and can't work. The European market just can't do for us what the American market does. We cannot replace the United States, which is why this is also foolish. The inferiority complex is forced upon the Canadian people because it's easier to be nothing than to be something. So Canadians choose to be nothing, to be ephemeral, to just be a basket of other people's identities while we are too cowardly to develop our own. And it shows. It shows when one of the topics in the space was first off, was Clyde Do Something's citizenship. He has citizenship in the United States and was saying how people resent him for that. There was a time in my life I would have been jealous, but I'm not jealous anymore. I see it as something to respect and even have a little bit more pride in, because the Americans didn't grow up in the wings of the British Empire or the wings of Europe as we did. But the subject of conversation was Poilievre's loss and how he blew the election. And you know something? I've said this during the election. It's not popular. I've said it in the post-election time. I don't think people understand just how hypnotized Canada actually is. And I do believe that the Conservative Party is playing to win. That's one of their problems. They're playing to win. They're playing to win with Canada as it is rather than deploying their resource to wake people up, to actually mount a campaign that might actually force those people in the middle to acknowledge some realities. All they got to do is tell the truth. And if they did, the political mind would shift. I'm sure of it. No one's ever tried. No one's ever tried. They're too afraid to say it's wrong to kill babies in the womb in the third trimester. That's something the vast majority of Canadians find repugnant. It's actually a winning issue. If they just tried, if they just tried to sell it, if they just tried to fight, if they just tried to oppose. Canada's like an international eunuch. It's not about the size of our balls. It's about the fact that we don't have any. You can actually see the total lack of respect that Canada has been held in throughout the entire Trudeau regime. It was even possible to discern it when Harper was in office. This is a bipartisan issue. I recall during Trump's first term, in the midst of trade negotiations, it's almost like deja vu right now between Europe and the United States and Canada and the United States. They had a junket over in Europe, and that fool Trudeau went over there, was caught on a hot mic talking trash about Donald Trump. And the Europeans, because Trudeau loves the spotlight, folks, the reason that Poilievre lost the election is that Trudeau is a deeply unwell, narcissistic sociopath. And it's clear that that's what he is. And it became clear to the Liberals. They didn't think they were wrong. They just thought they had the wrong guy at the helm. And forcing him out was all they needed to come back home, even as they parachuted a central banker, the literal opposite of a defender of the middle class. This guy's a looter. This guy has designed companies to help people who are wealthy keep more of their money. That's what he's done. And Liberals united around him. The Europeans so disdained Justin Trudeau that they barely acknowledged his existence around the table. They didn't really wait for him and cater to him for all of the photo opportunities. They looked annoyed the entire time. And then they sent him out to read a press statement that they had concocted where he talked so tough to the United States And then as soon as he was gone, flown back to this non-national state that we live in called Canada, the Europeans cut a deal behind his back with Donald Trump and left us strung out in the cold. Canada is not respected. I remember when Trudeau came into office, he said, Canada's back, but it's not. There hasn't been a Canada to get back to, a strong national fabric identity since the 1970s. We are 50 years into official multiculturalism, officially the death of a Canadian identity and the embracement of the post-national state. And here's what we talk about in our state-funded media. Go after yourself, what Stephen Colbert and other late-night hosts had to say after late show cancellation. That's not what happened. Donald Trump made some comments. And so these people made it all about Donald Trump. You know, Colbert's made a lot of money. Jon Stewart's made a lot of money. These are incredibly wealthy people who have done well for themselves. And they're getting canceled. Colbert's getting canceled because of ratings issues. Because he's not making money for the network anymore. But they made it about Trump, and CBC is more than happy to go along with it. Why Daniel Smith has eased off Kill Bill C-69 language in the Carney era, demands to repeal Project Review Law, gives way to urging substantive amendments like oil companies prefer. Look at the picture they pick of her versus the one they pick of Carney. He's always behind a desk. He's always looking authoritative. And Daniel Smith just looks it's just a weird picture. It's just weird. That's all it has to be for it to be effective propaganda. It was a long-standing, year-old cry from Alberta leaders ever since the movement Trudeau era, since the moment that the Trudeau-era Bill C-69, what former Premier Jason Kenney dubbed the No More Pipelines Act, was first published. A years-old cry. Just those whining Westerners wanting some kind of autonomy and actually wanting to prosper and build things, build pipelines, get the energy to market. Just a bunch of whiners. More Canadians may be thinking of a staycation this summer, but has domestic travel become unaffordable? There's a bump in domestic travel, but the cost of staying local is hard to justify for some. It's so expensive to do anything in this country. You know, I was actually watching a YouTube channel, Nick Johnson, the other night. And Nick Johnson, what he does is he travels around to cities all over America and the world, and he shows you what they're like. And he was showing Toronto, and he's like, wow, you know, the worst sections of Toronto look better than many U.S. inner cities. But he also noted the incredible price of housing, which is in free fall. It's actually in a collapse as we speak. The housing crisis, the crisis in real estate value hasn't even started yet. It's just kicking off. Again, this is another thing CBC will not tell you about, is what's actually going on. I just have, where is it? Getting sidetracked here, and I will finish up with the Nick Johnson point, but this is, look at this. This is just a snapshot of what's happening in the real estate market. So you have a listing. House was sold for $292,000 in 1996. In 2025, $2.65 million, but the listing was terminated because this was listed on April 17th of 2025. They relisted April 28th, so 10 days later at a steep discount. Then in May for another discount. Then June, July, and now here we are, July 21st, $1.399 million. That's a 50% off discount. My thinking is this, because I've been watching where houses are listing and where they're selling, and everything is selling below asking for the most part. There's a few anomalies, but it's below asking, and these are in the biggest real estate markets in Canada. This is a process that's only begun because most people who bought the high prices have no exit strategy. They can't get out. I was talking to somebody the other day back in Bowmanville, Ontario, near Bowmanville, Ontario. Might actually technically be Oshawa. I think of it as Bowmanville. It doesn't matter. It's all the same. It's all swamp gas. Bought a townhouse for $700,000. They didn't even sand the screw holes in the drywall. These things are made of paper and sticks. $700,000. And you're not going to be able to get out from under that because we're only at the start, folks. We're only at the beginning of the highest real estate markets in this country and the crisis they're about to face in real estate values. Even as, and this is the crazy part, even as hundreds of thousands of new Canadians and permanent residents show up every single year. Do you know a lot of those people, like the TFWs, they ain't buying houses, folks. They're indentured serfs. So yes, they put pressure on the housing market because they're often living in flop houses where there's a dozen people, 20 people all living in the same house. They put pressure on the housing market, but it's crazy. Our immigration system is bringing in all of these people, and we are not building enough housing for them all. And we have this happening in real time, and nobody's telling you about it. The collapse of the worth of the price of property. There should be infinite buy pressure, and yet there's not. Now, the liberal base desperately needs real estate prices to stay up because this is how most people have structured and planned their retirement, because they've been watching the number go up for a long time. And when they find out they can't sell out, it's going to really screw up their financial planning. Another SOP, actually, is there's a benefit coming out. I can't remember what month it's coming out, but it's a $2,200 seniors benefit, specific to seniors, to help them top up with their expenses coming from the government, which doesn't have any money because we're $100 billion deficit this year. That's where we're going to be. It's 94 officially, but we're heading towards $100 billion plus. By the time they're done playing around, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. We might not even get a budget in September. This country's so screwed up. It's such a bloody mess. But anyway, back to Nick Johnson, because he was going through Toronto and he was remarking about how clean things are in Toronto compared to U.S. cities. Do you know what they do in Ontario? They periodically relocate the homeless to evenly distribute the burden all over Ontario. So they create homeless camps emanating from the city in places like North Bay and Sudbury and even smaller towns way up north. They just pick these people up and they drop them in these small towns to spread out the burden on municipal budgets. Perhaps that's why Toronto and the areas that you were looking at look so clean, because the crisis is evenly distributed. But I'll tell you, if you go to Oshawa, Ontario, you can see something even worse. Oshawa has been in a free fall. I grew up or at least I spent part of my youth in South End, Oshawa. I know a thing or two about what Oshawa used to be, and it wasn't very good compared to what it is now. You've got convenience stores and Tim Hortons and fast food chains declining to even open because of the rampant crime. But anyway, getting back to the point, we're supposed to be picking on the CBC, right? Let's try and stay on point. Thinking of staycations, but has domestic travel become more affordable? You know that they say that the average budget of a Canadian for a vacation every single year is $4,000. I think it's $3,800. Who in the hell has $3,800 to ball around on vacation? I sure as hell don't. I don't think most of the working people I know have $3,800 to go play that game. U.S. Olympic Paralympic officials bar transgender women from competing in Olympic women's sport. This is your tax dollars at work. Should be a fairly common sense thing, but here's a CBC article letting you know how terribly sexist and racist it is to actually want women to be safe in women's only spaces, organizations, and sports. Trump's a bad guy because he won't let men compete directly against women, and that's what they are. They're men LARPing around as women. Fired BC nurse launches human rights complaint, says constitutional advocacy group. College found Amy Ham made discriminatory statements towards transgender people while identifying as a nurse. I could go through this because this is a person that's being discriminated against because they believe that men are men and women are women. We're better when we stick to our lanes in terms of our sex, that this gender nonsense is just that, nonsense. But this is what I just wanted to talk about. Identifying as a nurse. I'm pretty sure being a nurse requires that you go to school and you acquire some skills. Are they saying that I can now just claim I'm a nurse and I'll become a nurse? Like, what is this language? Identifying as a nurse? They could have said, while practicing as a nurse, while employed as a nurse. They could have picked a bunch of different words, but they used the term identifying. And why did they do that? I think the reasons are obvious. I find the effort of talking about Canada in any detail to be the extreme of tedium at this point. Somebody in the comments section described politics in Canada as an exercise in tedium, and it stuck with me. And it is important, but you have to remember that we're some 200 videos in since the start of the new year, or since September, I don't know when. We're quite a few videos, and you go count them. I don't even have an idea of how many I've got up there. Most of them have focused on Canada. And I'm a little beat on it. I don't feel like I have an officially representative voice. Not in my own capacity, but also in politics. The conservative opposition is supposed to be telling us the truth on these matters, and they don't. And the reason they don't is because politics is downwind of culture, and the vast majority of Canadians, 60-70% of Canadians, are more than happy with the status quo that I have described at length in this video and other previous videos. They love it. They love the servitude. They love the broken system. They love waiting in line for a year for health care. They take pride in it. They love the medical experiment and what was done to people. They completely ignore the outcomes. They love seeing people being converted into political prisoners, and the only people that can get justice in this country served against them with long-term jail sentences are those that fall afoul of the reigning political ideology. And they love the system with appointed senators and appointed justices, and everything stacked against you with no real divine human rights, but rights that descend only from government that can be suspended on a whim. And when it's discovered that they were suspended wrongfully, nothing happens. The people that those laws were used against go to jail. We're in the process of being supervised by a European manager who represents the interests of finance and investment companies and central banking. He wrote a book where he used the word Main Street a few times, but he never described what Main Street actually looks like. To him, all the wisdom and goodwill in the world descends from the super rich and from the oligarchs. And the country united, the left in this country, overwhelmingly voted for this guy. Love it. They love the myth. They were just happy to see Trudeau gone. And we're being managed, not governed. Government has been converted into a tool of globalist management. We're being gutted and given away, and we're going to be gutted and given away to the worst people at the table. Not the best people. The best people are the Americans, always willing with a bag of capital to buy whatever we produce. Always willing to defend us because we're so pathetic we can't do it ourselves. We just went through this whole thing about NORAD and a Cessna and how American jets were scrambled, and people can't even understand that we don't defend our own airspace. And they just say the word NORAD, NORAD. It's not even a word. It's a term, NORAD. They say it over and over again as if it just solves all problems. It doesn't defeat the point that we are not capable of looking after ourselves. As I said, we're a nation with an inferiority complex and an ego so outsized. We got the biggest chip on our shoulder, but we can't explain why it's there. So in the next video, maybe I'll talk a little bit about Canada, but I'm certainly not going to produce another oration like this, exclusively focused on Canada, because there's so little good to say.